Lying, living special. Evil is expertise. For the truth, we don't need no. The power to deceive. The whole world has become his workshop. It's all in the game to him. The past religion, science, nothing is sacred. No. Nothing is sacred to him. Whenever man is straight, you can just hear that song play. Oh, can't you see? That snake there in the garden, the one that tricks around and he's loving and Santa Claus, and that image on the wall, everyone wants to believe. It's the truth of a revelation being not mistaken, the real thing. That's him. Don't waste your time in nothing. You a bit of good, cause it's only life is in your life. Don't understood. If you would just start believing in truth and reality, then you take life away. But as long as you keep using him, you're using truth. You can die. Does he go? Or does he stay?
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, thank you for joining us this morning for Quran Salat Institute as we continue on the subject of Jinn, Iblis, Shaitan, and Taghut. We don't know how long it's going to go, but it's going to go as Allah allows, alhamdulillah. And we played the last 25 minutes or so of last week's broadcast, as is our way, so that we can keep a link for those of you who may have not been with us last week to get the idea there, and even for those of you who were, to kind of refresh your mind on where we are in that. Now, before I proceed, we always welcome comments, questions, need for clarification as we continue with the subject. But this is an ongoing subject, so therefore, if you need some clarification before we take some more steps, then now's the time to ask for that clarification. If you want to check and see if your understanding is correct, you can do that, and anything else momentarily. But that is an offer with a shelf life of about 10 seconds if you want to take advantage of that opportunity. Welcome to our Facebook and YouTube families. I can see comments at the moment, but as soon as I get started, I go away from the comments. I'm not looking at the comments, so therefore I'm not ignoring you, and I'm not looking at the studio. Therefore, Blog Talk people, I'm not ignoring you. This is the time, this moment, for you to have your input. Start the clock. All right. Well, we're gone. Alhamdulillah. I appreciate it. I know you comfort us. No, it's no slap on nobody. It's just, you understand and you're ready to rock. Let's go. Okay. So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Last week, we started into, well, the main focus was the idea of epistemology. Short version, epistemology is what determines for you what is knowledge. Epistemology, right? If somebody tells you something, and if you take it, said, yes, that's information, I take it, I agree with it, I understand it, I add it to things that I deem to be true, and therefore you take it in as knowledge and as information, because you're going to be formed inside by virtue of that you've accepted as knowledge. Okay, so we talked about that epistemology and how what determines the individual's epistemology is their frame of reference. What is a frame of reference? The frame of reference is the scale that you use, or the frame, the lens, the filter, many different words for it, that you use that tells you, that is you as an individual, that this is acceptable or that's unacceptable. What's doing that for you? Frame of reference. Okay, so once you've accepted a frame of reference, then all information, all signals, because it's only information, once you decode it and you embrace it and it becomes a part of you, now it's information. All the time before that, it's just signal. It's just signal. And you can look this up. There are a lot of things pop into my mind as I go, the difference between signal and noise, right? So the point is that it's round figures, it's all noise until your frame of reference picks out of the noise what is a signal, right? I'm not going to go any further than that. So the idea is that epistemology is what's determining. Okay, well then that is also the frame of reference, the filter, the code, the basis upon which you decode and distinguish between what is signal, what is noise, or what is knowledge and what is not knowledge. All that is based on your frame of reference. So we're reading a hadith of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we're going into Imam Muhammad's answer to a question about the hadith of Allah showing Jibril hell and paradise, Jannah and Jahannam. He's showing him both of them, and they both appeared in two different conditions. I'm not going to read it right now. It's like you should be familiar with what we're saying, and that's for you and me, saves time. That so saw that he was shown the paradise and said everybody's going to want to go there. Then he was shown it after the hardships that surrounded it, and nobody's going to make it. Then the hell was shown and said, well, nobody wants to go there. And then it showed it after it has been decorated with allurements. And then Jibril said, nobody's going to be able to escape it. And so that's the gist of the hadith. The point to be made that we are driving towards in order to make a statement about Imam Muhammad's statement in terms of his interpretation of that is that upon what basis does one decide what a reading means? It's going to have to do with your frame of reference. It's going to have to do with your epistemology. It's going to have to do with what you have been told with regard to what constitutes knowledge and quote unquote not knowledge. All of that's your epistemology, all of that. Okay, Imam Muhammad, rahimahullah, for his students, he provides the epistemology. For his students, he provides the frame of reference. He provides the filter, okay? And mashallah, that's what it is, right? So you have the economics, right? The Austrian School of Economics, and you have the Chicago School of Economics, just to mention a couple, right? Then you have those people who are Democrats, you have people who are Republicans, you have people who are independents, you have people who are, different labels that people have. But with each label is a frame of reference. With each label is an epistemology. With each label is something that says this is true and that is false for those individuals. Okay, well, Imam Muhammad's students are the same. It's like, okay, what Imam Muhammad presents to us who subscribe to his school of thought, it's real, it's actual. Then it's okay, this is knowledge, that is not knowledge. It said this is interpreted correctly, that's misinterpreted. And so Imam Muhammad, rahimahullah, he provides the rationale for those who study him at the Imam doesn't and didn't, and thank Allah for those who are preserving what the Imam Muhammad left as our inheritance. You can still study the Imam and get those details, get those axioms and postulates. I'm gonna say something about that in a minute. Those things that are axiomatic, those postulates that come from Imam Muhammad that are real, critical knowledge, and these things have place in the world of those who quote unquote know. But many of us, because as a general rule, we are from among the quote unquote illiterate when you talk about elite knowledge, when you talk about higher knowledge and higher learning. Most of us are not in that category. And Allah knows who is. There's a lot of rich hadith regarding that. Don't think that just because you don't know letters that means that you're ignorant, if you will. Even though there are people who would describe us in that way. But moving past that, the point is that there are certain things that are axiomatic. There are certain postulates as regard Imam Muhammad's knowledge, which we carry, his students, which we carry as a lens to Quran. We carry as a lens to the hadith. We carry as a lens to different other forms of knowledge and information. And it's through that filter and through that screen that we say, okay, well, I agree with that. I disagree with that. I accept that. I accept that. But everybody else, just I'm exaggerating. Everybody else says, mashallah. That's what they say. We say this, And so last week we spent time trying to get what I'm going to call an objective third party, right? The person that we were quoting was a person who is not a student that I know of, a student of Imam Wadri Muhammad, and his audience, or the people that he's focused on, yes, the world, but also to those people who are scholars that are making determinations and interpretations and explanations, etc., of the Quran and of Hadith, which particularly this book that we're quoting is from Dr. Jonathan A.C. Brown, Misquoting Muhammad. That's his book, and he's in that clarifying with his expertise how the different readings of Hadith, the rightness, the wrongness of those various interpretations. And more particularly, and especially in what we're talking about right now, is methodology for accepting and rejecting hadith, accepting and rejecting interpretations of hadith, comparing and contrasting the language of the Quran versus the language of hadith, and how you can know the difference between one and the other. That's what the book is about. We've pulled out and focused on the part that I believe we need to have an appreciation for, particularly the fact that just because something is written in an explicit way in the hadith, that doesn't mean that it only means what those words explicitly say. And so the need is to be able to understand that you can go away from the explicit, especially when it comes to hadith. You can even go away from the explicit in the Quran in relationship to how it is to be understood circumstantially as well, but not without very clear justification in doing so. And this, I'm gonna go to a Lou Rawls statement. Some of y'all know Lou Rawls. Down here on the ground, those of us down here on the ground, it's like if you don't really understand that, yeah, that's acceptable. If you don't really understand, then you have this fear that said, no, it's got to be exactly what it said, and whatever, and then you try to make your mind work it out from the explicit. When in fact, if you moved a few levels up, you would find that it said, nah, you don't have to read it. You don't have to read it like that. And you're not wrong if you read it in a different way. When you have a basis for that decision that is, quote unquote, by consensus and generally understood historically, and by those, quote unquote, who have, how can you say, validity as leaders of knowledge, they say, well, yeah, you can do it like that. I wouldn't do it that way, but yeah, you can do it that way. That, brother and sister, that's why you have so many madhabs. We only talked about, we're only addressed by the idea that there are 4 schools, but I think that's a Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John play on the world. He said, well, you can only have 4. MashaAllah. Okay, so the idea then that we are addressing is from Jonathan Brown's Misquoting Muhammad, to get to the point. Now, with Allah's help and grace and my own discipline, let me just read the quote and then go on. We got through most of it last week, so inshallah I can just read it and be finished and go to Imam Muhammad's commentary. All right. Dr. Jonathan A.C. Brown, misquoting Muhammad, he said, in a famous hadith, the Prophet warns his followers that the signs of the hypocrite are three. If he speaks, he lies. If he makes a promise, he breaks it. If he is trusted with something, he betrays it. All right. So he let's just keep reading. There was no clear statement in the Quran or Hadith that directed Hassan. He's talking about Hassan al-Basri and At-Tirmidhi, one of the noted compilers of the Hadith. There was no clear statement in the Quran or in Hadith that directed them to this interpretation. Their interpretation was that hypocrisy that's being addressed is the specific or definitive hypocrisy, the religious hypocrisy, and the other one is a now I gotta go specifically to get it clear since I've gotten there. Let's see. Last week I had to go back and get a larger. All right. Two types. Hypocrisy of action and hypocrisy of disbelief. So that was the conclusion that they were drawn, and that they drew, and that has been promoted down through the ages. So that interpretation, after it had been expressed and people sought to live it out after the passing of the Prophet, when these compilations by these 9th century scholars, so that's 1,000 years ago, but for the time before that, there were people who were reading this hadith as though it meant that anybody that did any of those things were hypocrites. And so then when you take that and move it over to real world life, then how many people are not hypocrites among the Muslims, right? It's like, damn, it's like just about everybody's a hypocrite, because at some point in time, everybody is very, very likely, let's put it like that, it's very, very likely that out of these three things, in terms of speaking the truth or telling a lie, making a promise or breaking it, being entrusted with something and betraying the trust, there's a very, very high likelihood that, yes, even Muslims at some point in time in their life are going to break one of these three rules. All right. Does that make them a hypocrite? Well, if you just stick with the explicit of the hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and don't think beyond that, well, then that mean anybody who does any of this is a hypocrite. So I was blessed. So no. But in the 9th century, these scholars said, well, no, we have to look at it another way. Okay. So now I can go back to the quote. It says there was no clear statement in the Quran or Hadith that directed these scholars to this particular interpretation, hypocrisy of action, dividing it into hypocrisy of action, hypocrisy of disbelief. The quote goes on and says, there seems only to have been, that is something that they had in themselves, these scholars, there seems only to have been a profound belief. They believe something strongly. On the basis of what? Drawn from the aggregate ethos of early Islamic teachings. Right? Meaning they studied, they scoured, they researched the religious sources. And if we understand this, then this is precisely what Mu'adh ibn Jabal was affirmed in doing, an understanding which he had himself come to, But being examined by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam before he was to take his commission as the first governor of Yemen, Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anhu, the Prophet asked him, "How are you going to make your judgments?" He said, "I'll search the Quran." He said, "And if you don't find the answer there, I'll search your practice." He said, "And what if you don't find the answer there?" He said, "Then I'll exert myself to come up with the best understanding." And the Prophet, peace be upon him, patted him on the chest, said, "Praise be to Allah, who has given the messenger of Allah a messenger with whom he is pleased." Yes, there's something in that. You pay attention. So the point is that at Tirmidhi, Hassan al-Basr, what they did, radiallahu anhuma, what they did was what Mu'adh ibn Jabal did. And now what Dr. Brown is saying, there was no clear statement in the Quran or the Hadith that directed them. Well, then what did they do? Ijtahidu ra'i. They exerted themselves with ijtihad to come up with the best view. Well, that's what you do. That's what you do. Why was it even a question? Because it was problematic. People were thinking that anybody who did any for hundreds of years, because they're in the 9th century, so that you're talking 1000s, right there, right? The Prophet passed in the 7th century, so you got that kind of, is Jesus man and God, or is Jesus God, blah blah. That whole Third Council of Nicaea kind of issue. Relative to this and other matters that trouble the Muslim world. Somebody had to come up with an answer that would bring peace to society and to the minds and the hearts and the souls and spirits of the Muslim. Okay, well, this is what they did. Okay, so going back to Dr. Brown's statement, said, so how did they come up with it? If it wasn't in the Quran, if it wasn't in the Hadith, how'd you come up with that? Because they drew from the aggregate ethos of early Islamic teachings. Okay, so this reinforces the need to, yes, we have to study, and we have to study a lot in these matters to do that. So now moving on. So it's like they drew from the aggregate ethos of early Islamic teachings that the hypocrisy in the Quran and the hypocrisy confronting everyday Muslims were two distinctly different species. This is from men who think, right? You know what I'm saying? These the men who know. That's what they do. You have to research and study it. So their conclusions were that there are two distinct species, right? And it wasn't fair to apply that quote unquote ideal standard and label of hypocrisy to everybody and everyday actions among the Muslims. Continuing Dr. Brown's quote, he says, as these examples suggest, the charity that Muslim scholars granted passages from the Quran and Hadith in order to read them as a part of a greater encompassing system of truth meant that their literal meaning was often set aside together. I mean, that could be a banner statement and personal. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to read it again, right? Here is a contemporary scholar, the author that I'm reading, bringing us information from scholars in the history of al-Islam, established and accepted scholars that bear the credentials, whose epistemology and whose accepting from them is broadly, practically universal among the Muslims. So therefore, this becomes axiomatic. Then I'm going to give the axiomatic and postulate piece after this, but hold on to this. The point is that we're talking about a rule of knowledge in and for interpreting the Quran, quote unquote, and interpreting the Hadith of the Prophet that Muslim scholars accept as axiomatic, that they accept as postulate, that this understanding is a given. Put that in your tool belt so that when you go around the Quran and when you go around the Hadith, sometimes you need to pull that tool out in order to draw the best understanding, which Allah has ordered us to seek. Seek the best understanding. Sometimes you need this postulate. Sometimes you need this axiom in order to satisfy your heart. Because no. Your first inclination is, look, I'm going to stick with exactly what it says. Okay, but then if something troubles your heart about, if I stick with that explicitly, then that would actually lead to this. And is this something that Allah wants us to go to? Is this something that the Prophet would direct us to? I'm not comfortable with that, right? Another postulate, truth is what makes the heart feel tranquil, and falsehood is what wavers in the heart, even though you've been given fatwa that supports your position. So the satisfaction of the heart is critical in this matter, and the heart is critical in the entire search/research that goes on. So let's go back. So Dr. Brown is saying that as these examples suggest, that is, he's given several examples. I just used basically the last one. As these examples suggest, the charity, meaning that, okay, let's give them some leeway in the way that they're reading this and the way that they're interpreting that, the way that they're quote unquote translating this. Let's give some leeway. So that's intellectual charity. Okay, come on. Okay, let's see what you got. The charity, right? The charity that Muslim scholars granted passages from the Quran and Hadith in order to read them. So you give a little more latitude in the way that you're reading and not such a tight reading to the explicit terminology itself. That the charity Muslim scholars granted passages from the Quran and Hadith in order to read them as a part of a greater encompassing system of truth. Now, that statement right there, take that as frame of reference. Take that as frame of reference. To read them in accordance with a greater encompassing system of truth. That is, this hadith does not come to us in a vacuum. This Quran does not come to us in a vacuum. It comes to us in a context. The Quran comes to us in a context, and especially as Bab al-Nuzul, for example, every revelation came in a particular time, place, for a particular reason, etc. And if you don't have that context, then it's very difficult for you to be assured that your reading of it on the first order is the right reading. So again, the scholars grant passages latitude when as needed according to their fit to a greater encompassing system of truth. And we spent time talking about that last week. So God doesn't contradict himself. He doesn't contradict himself inside the revelation itself, nor does what he revealed contradict the reality of creation as it is presented here. Whether you understand the full depths and what the Iqbal, Muhammad Iqbal, rahimahullah alayh, he said, the laws of nature are the garments of reality. The laws of nature are the garments of reality. What does that mean? Okay, you can see the clothes, but you don't see what's behind the clothes. But look at the clothes. They'll give you some idea of the form that's behind it, but it is not actually saying to you what it actually is, but it's a garment, right? All right, so in the same way, the idea is that what the Quran reveals is not contradict. It will not contradict what the creation also quote unquote reveals. Even though there's some things that are evident in the creation, and there's some things that are not evident in the creation. There's the physical and there's the metaphysical. Well, when it comes to Quran, life model of Prophet Muhammad, those reports that we have from him, there's also the implicit and the explicit, the batin and the zahir, what's evident and also what is hidden. That's the nature of it, right? And so having an understanding that reality is not only what you see, and also understanding that, as Quran says, it's not without aim or purpose that Allah has created all of this. This is how the believer looks at the creation. It's not without aim or purpose that Allah has created all this. Everything has an aim or a purpose. So there's a greater scheme, there's a greater system in everything. And the system that you are seeing physically is not the limits of the existence itself, because the believers, we are told, we are described as yu'minuna bil ghaib. We believe in the unseen. So the seen is not all there is to the truth, right? And mashallah, Allah says in the Quran, He gave everything its form and gave everything a place within the system. So if you're going to understand something properly, then you have to understand the system in which that thing exists. You have to understand the system in which that thing exists, right? Catalytic converter. What does that mean to you? Catalytic converter. Doesn't mean anything until you understand the system in which it exists, right? Let's move on. Okay, so the point is that a part of scholarship and a part of understanding requires an awareness of the greater encompassing system of truth. All right, so this is what At-Tirmidhi and Hasan al-Basri and others who read what Allah has revealed and what has been preserved for us of the Prophet, and through that they understand the ethos of early Islamic teaching. So all that becomes the big picture. All that becomes the big picture. All that becomes the what enables us to get beyond the literal, to get to the implied and indeed the information that is actually in what has been communicated. Because in the final analysis, Allah is revealing that is to become information for us, right? He's revealing that. And in order for that to become information, you have to be able to decode what Allah has sent. Allah said He revealed the Quran in Arabic in order that you may learn to think. This is what the Quran said. He revealed it in Arabic that you might learn to think, right? So the code is the Quranic Arabic. That's the code. In order to decode it, you're going to have to be able to read the Quranic Arabic, right? And then even after reading the Quranic Arabic, when you begin to talk about what it means, then you also have to have a understanding of the greater encompassing system of truth in which that Quran is revealed. All right, so I believe we understand it tacitly, meaning, in our hearts, we understand and we accept that. We believe that Hasan al-Basri, we believe that Tirmidhi, we believe they had all that. They had all that, right? They understood the greater encompassing system of truth, and Allah knows best. This is what allowed them to set aside the literal meaning. Once you get to a certain level of knowing, and how you're not dismissing of, yeah, that's true, but there's a bigger thing. That's why the Musa story, it always plays in this for sure. It's like Moses had the book, he had the letters, and part of the symbolism itself is that when he was looking for his food, which was the fish, big symbol there, but he sought his rest. Quran tells you he sought his rest on a rock. He sought his rest on a rock, and then he said, "Bring me my lunch." And he said, "Oh, didn't you see it got away from us? It got away from us. It took away in the channel. It took away in the channel straight, and it said none but Shaitan made us forget it." And so, oh, that's the place we were looking for. Then went back, which is where the two rivers meet, and there was the wise man. It's too much in that to continue to talk about it, but enough to say that Moses seeking rest on a rock, he thought that when you come to the logical conclusion, you've come to the conclusion. Some people think that logic is going to lead you to the destiny. Some people think that just being able to reason, make inferences based on data points, and then you can come to conclusion. This premise plus that premise comes to that conclusion, and that's it. That's the truth. You don't need to talk about nothing else. No, Moses' model for us communicates that message to us. No, logic is not going to always lead you to the conclusion you're looking for. And well, I have to tell you, it just depends on you. Your own interest. There's this. His name is Gödel, Goedel. There are those who have explicitly just proven mathematically that all true statements cannot be proven. All true statements. I'm gonna leave it right there. So if you want to see further, Gödel's incompleteness theory. Just look it up. Getting Gödel for dummies. Either way, I'm just saying that's one of the ways to get simply to it. So the point is that, and I'm stating it simply, that those who know science and those who know logic and those who know mathematics from this factual scientific perspective, it is taken as axiomatic that everything that is true cannot be proven. Everything that's true cannot be proven. But there are certain things that are axiomatic. So I guess I do have to make this statement. Here, brother and sister. This is a class. Y'all know that, right? All right, here's a question, and mashallah, an answer. And what this has to do with Jinn, Iblis, Shaitan, and the other, wallahi, inshallah, once you get something established, you can take off and you don't have to look back. You don't have to look back. It's like, this is done, boom, you go. So I'm saying, once you get clear that Imam Muhammad's reading of that hadith that says that it's Satan that did it, and you understand the justification for his saying, even though the hadith said Allah did this and Allah did that, and the Imam said, no, Satan did that. Once you understand the right and the authority and the consensus that supports that particular take on it, now it's like it opens up oceans of knowledge about the Jinn, Iblis, Shaitan, and the Taghut. Now, you just have to have the patience to get the foundation that your heart needs in order to allow you to continue to reason upon that as your cornerstone. If you got that, then it's like, man, you want to understand the Jinn, you want to understand Iblis, you want to understand Shaitan, you want to understand the Taghut, well, you got to wait and get the foundation. You got to wait to get the foundation. Mashallah. That's what it's. So, Fahim, back up. All right. So the difference between axiom and postulate, it's important. This is basically kind of like just an online definition of it, but it makes the case. I mean, because in final analysis, it's arithmetic, if you understand what I mean. So what is an axiom? AXIOM. What is an axiom? An axiom is something which is considered to be true, but without a clearly defined proof. This is what I was just talking about with his name is Kurt Gödel, is spelled Goedel, incompleteness theorem. It's like it's axiomatic. The point is, it is axiomatic that there are certain things that are considered to be true without a clear, defined proof. Do you understand that scientists, they come to an agreement and say, okay, look, it's true. We don't have to spend a whole lot of time with that. That's quote unquote self-evident, a priori, different language that's used. Okay, next. They say, okay, we got that. Next. We don't have to spend a lot of time on that. We agreed, stipulated, granted. Okay, go on with the experiment. Okay, so that means that thing becomes axiomatic. So it's like, we don't discuss that. We don't have to debate that. It's like, that's a given. So it's axiomatic that there are certain things that have to be considered true without clearly defined proof. That's science. Oh man, prove it. Science don't ask you to prove everything. Science said, well, that's self-evident that's true. MashaAllah. And people have their different disagreements in the scientific community. MashaAllah. But that doesn't change the fact that it is true, that certain things are true without having been clearly proven. Okay. So, so that's axiomatic. Let me finish what they said here. They said, you just know that it's true. Everybody agrees with it, but nobody can prove it's correct or disprove that it is incorrect. In a more formal note, the definition of an axiom can be given as a proposition which is self-evidently true. The example that's given is Euclid's, and with respect to stolen legacy, every time I say some kind of Greek knowledge guy, look, I got you. Ancient Kemet and all the rest of that, Pythagoras, Euclid, the Greeks, yeah. They got it from ancient Kemet. That's fine. Now, moving past that the whole is greater than the part. The whole is greater than the part. I know we used to hear the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Maybe that's questionable, but I'm not going to try to work that out right now. The point is that Euclid's fifth axiom is the whole is greater than the part. That's kind of self-evident, isn't it? Right? The whole is greater than the part. It's like, okay, take a whole pizza, take a piece of the pizza. From that, set it aside, ask the question, which one is bigger, the pizza or the part of the pizza? Okay, self-evident. So it's axiomatic that as a principle that the whole is greater than the part. And there are other things that are axiomatic. Let's move from axiom to postulate. A postulate is the same as an axiom. What is a postulate? A proposition which is self-evidently true. The statement that's given is a straight line segment can be drawn joining any 2 points. That is, you can draw a straight line between any 2 points, right? And the way that we commonly hear that statement is that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. That's like the colloquial, way that people have come to say it, but stated in its original way is that a straight line segment can be drawn joining any 2 points. Is that true? Yes. How is it self-evident? Just take 2 points from anywhere, put them anywhere, and see if you can draw a straight line from one of the points to the other of the points. And yeah, every time you can do that. So that is a postulate, that is axiomatic. And in terms of, as far as the quote unquote proof of that, is that you would have to be able to set up an infinite number of points, 2 points, and then 2 points, and then 2 points, and 2 points. It's like, unless there's a situation where you can go and get somewhere where you can set up 2 points, but then you can't draw a straight line to that, you'd have to be able to cover the infinity of 2-point locations. We got to get out of that, in order to say, no, I found one where you couldn't draw a straight line. Okay, no, let it go. The point is, so axioms and postulates are things that basically they are self-evident in cases. If they are identified as axioms or postulates, then they are self-evident. But now, when we move to, as we have said, we talk about Hassan al-Basri, we talk about at-Tirmidhi, we talk about the scholarship of al-Islam that has reached us, that enables, to go back to the statement, that let's see, that enables persons like Dr. Brown, and we are accepting that Muslim scholars granted passages for the Quran and Hadith in order to read them as a part of a greater encompassing system of truth meant that their literal meaning was often set aside altogether. So there's an agreement among the scholars that sometimes you set aside the literal meaning of something in favor of a better reading that more concurs with the aggregate ethos of Islamic teachings. So again, if you have a filter that says, nah, God wouldn't say anything like that. No, the prophet wouldn't say anything like that. And so what is axiomatic? The axiomatic is that God is good only and only accepts the good. So if God said it, then there's good in it. But if on the surface of it, the literal reading of it does not respect the reality of God, then we have to set aside the literal reading and find a reconciling reading that would, keep the veracity of the report, but also does not insult and say things about God that are, not respecting his reality. And we give the same concern and consideration to what the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gives us. Okay, I want to go on. So let's go ahead and start into the hadith of the Prophet that the Imam specifically responding to, and go with that. So we're moving from the perspective that it is okay. I'll use that. It is okay for the Imam to say that no, even though they said God did that, it is okay for the Imam to say no, it came from the devil, Satan. That action in there was not the action of God. It was the action of the Shaitan. Now, I'm gonna say something to you that I know we're not going to be able to complete, but it's another critical part for understanding it, because when you set aside the literal, as Dr. Brown is saying, and this is in concert with the history of Islamic scholarship, is that you can't do so without compelling reasons, right? And I think the compelling reason, and this is me talking. The Imam has his own reason, and Allah knows that it is, and whatever it was, I agree with it. Okay, so for me, is that it is not consistent with the sifat Allah. It's not consistent with the attributes of Allah. It's not consistent with the reality of Allah for Allah to do such a thing. So for me, that's enough, and I'm sure that that's also, Allah knows best, but I have no doubt that Imam Muhammad's position is the same with regard to that. It's an offense to Allah to say that he's the one that did such a thing. All right. So, this is all right, alhamdulillah, it must be. It says don't go to that right now. Oh, I'll say خلق الإنسان ضعيفا. خلق الإنسان ضعيفا. Imam has a very, very full teaching on that whole thing. That a simple expression of it is, and man was created weak. But when you understand the grammar in that statement, which Imam Muhammad explains when he talks about it, when you understand the grammar, and you start looking for the fi'al, the fa'al, and the maf'ul, and then you have to understand things like na'ib, fa'il, and yes, I'm going to leave it there for the people who know Arabic, at least that much of the Arabic. Then, and I'll say to them that with that, you will find the answer, and it is the absence of the fa'il in that sentence that opens up the door for the deeper, richer understanding. What does that have to do with what we're saying here? It's like the idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals something is done without revealing who the doer was. Allah reveals in the Quran something is done, but it doesn't reveal who the doer was. All right. And once you understand that, then you'll also come to understand that even in that verse, Allah is not the one. When you understand the Arabic, it says he revealed the Quran in Arabic that you might think, right? So once you get to that point and you say, oh, okay, well, if that means that, well, then you have to follow the inference and say, okay, well, then who did it, right? Who did it? It's not saying who did it. Well, who did it, right? And so when you find out who the na'ib fa'il is, then he's the one that did it. But if you read it literally, expressly, without the benefit of the grammar, you might think that it was God that did it. That's talking about, and that's the first understanding in just a common reading. Khuliqal insanu da'ifa. It's like, okay, the assumption without thinking about it is like, okay, God did it. Oh, really? Who's the fa'il in that? All right. So, okay, very similarly, understanding this when he says that no, there's the Shaitan that did it. That's also one of the things that helps to understand and support Imam's position. Let's see if we can get through the first two sentences, inshallah. So the Imam's answer to the query regarding what is it actually saying? Is it saying that it was the fantasy or the imaginations of man that did it, or was it God that did it? And so the Imam said, no, it was from the devil, Satan. It says that Satan made alluring to them. He puts the allurements in it. Pardon me. He puts the allurement in that. Okay. He makes the allurements. Not that it. Now, who's the it? The it is the creation itself. The creation itself. Right? He puts the allurements in that. That term THAT in that sentence is at that. Right? So I think I believe it's called Ismul Ishara. It's something that's pointing to something. He puts the allurements in that, right? So either way, that's a pronoun. So that stands for something. Creation. He puts the allurements in creation. So now I've taken that and made it say creation. Let's finish reading it. So he makes the allurements. Who's the he? Shaitan. Not that it didn't have attractiveness before. So allurements and attractiveness is talking about the same thing. There's something attractive about the creation. And now we can even say something distractive about the creation. All right. It was there, but man wasn't distracted by it until Shaitan made the attractive distractive. Right. So he makes the allurements. Not that it didn't have attractiveness before, but man obviously was not influenced by the zinnun, where the Imam says zinnun. So zinna is also, the term relates to beauty. Relates to beauty, but also you know that there's a connection between zinna with fornication and adultery, right? So there's meaning in those two things, right? He was not influenced. Man, at this point of his existence, he was not influenced by the Zinnun. He was not influenced by the attractive distraction that creation could be. But he was influenced by obedience. Okay, can't you see? Can't you see a young child, a young baby living in the world, being in the world, but obedient, but not distracted, attracted to things that are quote unquote harmful. That is harmful in that sense. That if you take that deliberately, yeah, well, baby, pick up some scissors, pick up a knife, pick up this, yeah, but that's that's not what we're saying. The child is obedient. You tell the child come here, the child's going to come here. Even if you tell the child stop, I'm talking babies, the before the 2-year-olds for sure. And you tell them stop, don't this, they will obey. So obedience is their nature, right? But of course, also when they get to be like 2 years old, we have this conversation about the terrible twos or what have you. When the ego, that is the sense of self, the sense of autonomy, has developed in a child, the first time the child says no, the first time they say no, and even if they react in a way that is not compliant to what you are demonstrating that you want, and you say, give me that, and the child they can't talk, they don't know anything, all they know is no, I'm going to keep this, you can't have that. So at that moment they have their own will. At their moment they have their own will, they have their own example, pardon me, they have their own desire, right? They have their own sense of self, right? So that's where problems can begin to come in, even though they don't become mukallaf until they reach puberty, which is a whole nother story. So all of that is to simply say that the human being is obedient by and in their original nature. This is one of the meanings that the human being was created from clay. The human being created from clay, it means that the human being accepts impressions, and they can be molded and they can be shaped and they are malleable, right? So that's how we are as human beings, right? So the point is that in accordance with our original nature, we were in a good state. We were in that garden state. We were in that obedient state until we became distracted by something that began to happen in our consciousness, something else that began to happen in our consciousness. Because once you're alive, you are conscious, even though you are unconscious of your consciousness. There's a point where you can be manipulated unconsciously because you're not conscious of your own consciousness. You don't know what is forming and shaping and feeding your mind. And because you don't know what is forming, shaping, and feeding your mind, then someone who knows that you don't know what's shaping and forming and feeding your mind, they can feed your mind something that you're unconscious of. And then by the time it comes to your mind, quote unquote, or consciousness, you actually think is your thought. It's not your thought. It's something has been insinuated into you, and you've been led to believe that it's your thinking. That's that deadly deceiver. That's the Shaitan. But again, we want to get to that point that ties to, I have to leave a stronger hint for the others, خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, those who understand that, then you'll start to get a better understanding that, you keep looking outside for this Shaitan that's doing it. We're going to have to learn how to look inside to see Shaitan and his operations. And it says, Satan and his hosts watch you from a position you see them not. All that is, inshallah, with Allah's grace and help, inshallah, we'll get to that. But at least we're in the quote from the Imam, and we'll continue to progress through that. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Alhamdulillah. May Allah bless you with a wonderful day. And may Allah guide us to the best and forgive us our shortcomings. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.